Okay, so let's dive into this QAnon thing.
Yeah.
It's a wild one. It's one of those internet rabbit holes, that just seems to keep going and going and going.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you know what? Millions of people have gone down this rabbit hole, all trying to answer one question.
Mm-hmm.
Who is Q? And that is exactly what we're going to try to unpack today using the HBO documentary Q Into the Storm as our guide for this deep dive.
And, it's not just an online mystery, right? This QAnon thing has real-world consequences.
Oh, yeah.
We're talking families torn apart, political violence, even an impact on elections.
It's crazy.
It's a story that goes from the darkest corners of the internet to the steps of the Capitol.
It is absolutely wild how something that starts with just these cryptic messages online could end up having such a huge impact on the real world.
Absolutely.
So back in 2017, these messages, they're called Q drops, started appearing on 4chan. Now, 4chan, that's got a reputation, to say the least.
4chan, I mean, it's kind of the Wild West of online forums. Right. Very little moderation.
Yeah.
And that's actually, I think, a key factor in how QAnon was able to grow.
Okay.
These unmoderated spaces, they kind of become breeding grounds for all sorts of, fringe ideas.
Right.
And sometimes, unfortunately, those ideas turn dangerous.
Yeah.
As we see here.
So in these Q drops, Q claims to be like this high-level government insider.
Oh, wow.
With like top secret information, and that information, it's all about this massive global cabal of Satan-worshipping pedophiles who are running the world.
Oh, okay.
Pretty wild stuff.
Yeah.
And according to Q, the one person fighting this evil cabal, who is it? It's Donald Trump.
Oh, interesting.
Right. And this is where it gets really interesting because QAnon, it feeds off this like pre-existing distrust of authority of elites.
Of course, yeah.
But it takes it like a step further,
Okay.
For some people, Trump becomes this like almost messianic figure battling the forces of darkness. Interesting.
I mean, the brilliance of QAnon is how it just taps into these like pre-existing anxieties that are already out there.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's not just distrust of authority, though, right? It's a deeper fear.
Okay.
It's a fear of losing control, a fear that the world is becoming incomprehensible.
Right.
And QAnon offers the simple narrative, right? It's like, here's a clear enemy, this is what's happening, and it makes people feel empowered in a world that feels increasingly chaotic.
Right.
Which makes sense in a way.
And speaking of online spaces, we need to talk about 8chan.
Okay.
It was owned by this guy, Jim Watkins.
Right.
And for a while, it was run by his son, Ron.
Okay.
And the documentary actually suggests that Ron might be the key to unlocking this whole Q mystery.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, so Ron becomes kind of a central figure then.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
The documentary follows him pretty closely, and there's this one scene where he seems to let slip that he might have been behind Q all along.
Yeah, hold on.
Yeah.
What happens? So he's talking about, spending years doing this anonymous research online, teaching people about, quote, intelligence work, end quote. It's a huge moment in the documentary.
Yeah, I bet.
Of course, Watkins denies being Q.
Right.
But the doubt lingers. Yeah.
I mean, even if he wasn't like the puppet master, he was definitely pulling some strings.
Oh, absolutely.
And we have to remember, 8chan wasn't just a haven for, free speech. It was a breeding ground for algorithmic manipulation.
Right.
The lack of moderation meant that Q drops could be rapidly amplified.
Yeah.
It's like they were gaming the system to reach a wider audience. It's a dark side of these online platforms, that we're only beginning to understand.
Yeah, and that's where Frederick Brennan comes in.
Okay.
So he's the guy who created 8chan, believing in free speech, even in its most extreme forms.
Right.
But after witnessing how the platform became a haven for hate and violence, he actually dedicated himself to shutting it down.
Wow. So he had a change of heart.
Yeah, it's a fascinating clash of ideologies,
Yeah.
On one hand, you have the Watkins, who profited from 8chan's anything goes environment. On the other hand, you have Brennan, who came to believe that absolute free speech can have terrifying consequences.
Right.
So we have this tangled web of characters. Jim Watkins, this enigmatic owner of 8chan.
Yeah.
Ron Watkins, his son, possibly the man behind the Q mask.
Right.
And Frederick Brennan, the creator turned critic, fighting to dismantle the platform he built.
Wow.
It's a story that honestly has more twists and turns than a Hollywood thriller.
Yeah, for sure.
But we can't forget, this isn't just the story about, shadowy figures on the internet.
No.
QAnon has real-world victims.
Of course, yeah.
And to understand the human cost of QAnon, I think we need to hear from the believers themselves.
That's your point.
The documentary features these interviews with, they're called Cubers.
Cubers?
They're everyday people who got sucked into this world.
Okay.
And they truly believe this stuff. And it's affecting their lives in some really profound ways. Families are being torn apart, relationships destroyed.
Right.
So I think we need to, try to understand what draws people to these beliefs so strongly.
Absolutely.
What makes them dedicate their lives to spreading this message? It's almost like they're giving up everything for this.
Yeah, it's really fascinating, isn't it? I mean, one thing that I noticed is how these QTubers often start with these genuine concerns like, child safety, government corruption, things like that.
Right.
They're searching for answers, right? For something to believe in. And then they stumble upon QAnon, and it's like they've found all the answers.
Yeah.
Like all in one neat package.
Right.
And it makes them feel like they're in the know, you know? Like they're part of this select group fighting against a hidden evil.
Right. It's like QAnon provides this, simple explanation for a world that feels increasingly chaotic and complex.
Exactly.
And it's all wrapped up in this, thrilling narrative of good versus evil.
Good versus evil, yeah.
With them on the side of the righteous.
Oh, I see.
You know, they're the heroes in their own story.
And don't forget the community aspect of it, too.
Right.
These QTubers, they find each other online, right? They form these, tight-knit groups where they constantly reinforce each other's beliefs. So it becomes like a self-perpetuating echo chamber where dissenting voices are quickly silenced or even, attacked.
Right.
Which, I mean, that's how a lot of this stuff works.
So it's this, potent cocktail. A pre-existing distrust of authority, a desire for simple explanations, the allure of belonging to a community.
Right.
And then you add in the, addictive nature of the conspiracy itself.
It's a lot to unpack.
It's a lot.
But it's important to remember, these Qters aren't just, passively consuming information.
Right.
They're actively creating and sharing content, which further spreads the QAnon message.
Right.
So they become part of the propaganda machine, so to speak.
Well, right.
They believe they're spreading the truth and saving the world.
It's disturbing, but it really highlights how powerful online platforms can be.
Yeah.
In shaping beliefs and influencing behavior.
Absolutely.
And it raises this this big question. What can we do to combat this?
That's the question, isn't it?
If people are so convinced, how do we even begin to reach them?
That's the challenge, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, simply debunking conspiracy theories isn't enough.
Right.
We need to address the underlying conditions that make people susceptible to these beliefs in the first place.
So we're talking about building critical thinking skills, fostering media literacy, promoting healthy skepticism.
Exactly.
It's a multifaceted problem that requires a multifaceted approach.
Precisely. And it's a problem that goes beyond QAnon.
Right.
I mean, we're seeing the rise of misinformation and conspiracy theories across the board.
Right. Yeah.
Fueled by social media algorithms and the echo chamber effect. This affects everyone, not just those who, fall into these specific online communities.
It's a real threat to our democracy and our social fabric.
It is.
We need to find ways to bridge the divides, encourage civil discourse, and promote a shared understanding of reality.
Absolutely.
But how do we even start that conversation?
Yeah.
How do we get people to listen?
It's a difficult question.
Yeah.
But I think the documentary does offer some insights.
Okay.
While it focuses on QAnon, it also serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of online misinformation. Yeah. And the need for critical engagement with the information we consume.
Yeah.
It's a wake-up call for everyone.
We can't afford to be passive bystanders in this information war.
Yeah.
We need to be active participants, questioning what we see, verifying sources, and engaging in thoughtful dialogue.
Absolutely.
That sounds simple enough.
It does.
But it's so hard to actually put into practice.
It is, yeah.
Oh.
And we need to be compassionate, too.
Yeah.
Remember, many of those who fall prey to conspiracy theories are doing so out of genuine fear
Right.
anxiety or desire for belonging. So instead of dismissing them, we need to try to understand their motivations and engage them in a constructive way. We have to meet people where they are and try to build bridges.
It's a tall order.
It is.
But it's a challenge we have to meet if we want to preserve like a healthy and informed society.
Right.
The stakes are too high to ignore this issue.
Absolutely.
Well said. And for our listeners, I highly recommend checking out Q Into the Storm.
Yeah, me too.
It's a fascinating and at times disturbing look at the world of QAnon.
It is.
But it offers valuable lessons about the power and the peril of online information.
Yeah, it's a must-watch for anyone who wants to understand, like, the forces that are shaping our world today.
Right.
And it's a reminder that we all have a role to play in combating misinformation and promoting a more informed and engaged citizenry.
But before we jump to any conclusions, I think it's important to revisit some of the key events that fueled QAnon's rise.
Okay.
From, a fringe internet community to a movement that's actually influencing mainstream politics.
Right.
For example, the Pizzagate conspiracy.
Ah, yes. Pizzagate.
It's a perfect example of how QAnon weaponizes existing distrust and paranoia.
Yeah, Pizzagate, it really illustrates how QAnon takes a kernel of truth, in this case, the very real issue of child trafficking,
Right.
and twists it into this elaborate, fantastical narrative.
Right.
And remember, this was back in 2016.
Yeah.
Before Q even appeared on the scene.
Right.
But the Pizzagate conspiracy set the stage.
Yeah.
It created this fertile ground for QAnon's brand of misinformation to take root.
Right, and that misinformation spread like wildfire,
Oh.
thanks in part to, those platforms we've been talking about.
Of course, yeah.
8chan provided this unmoderated space for Q-drops to flourish,
Right.
and then social media algorithms helped amplify them to a much wider audience.
It was a perfect storm of factors.
It really was.
And as we continue our deep dive, we'll look at each of these elements in more detail.
Okay.
We'll try to understand how they all fit together and why this movement gained so much traction.
Sounds like a plan.
Yeah.
But before we get too deep into, the mechanics of it all, I think we need to bring in the voices of the believers.
Okay.
Let's hear from those Cubers we mentioned earlier.
Right.
What are their stories?
Yeah.
What led them down this path?
Absolutely. Their perspectives are crucial to understanding the human element of this phenomenon. So let's delve into those interviews and see what insights we can glean. What are they seeing that we're not?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. Yeah, it's fascinating how these QTubers, so often they start with genuine concerns, like child safety or government corruption, things like that. They're searching for answers,
right?
For something to hold on to in a world that feels increasingly unstable.
Right.
Then they encounter QAnon, and suddenly it's like they found the key to unlock all the world's mysteries.
It's like QAnon offers this sense of order, in the midst of all this chaos. They're presented with a clear enemy, a secret battle, and they get to be part of the resistance, fighting for truth and justice. It's a powerful narrative.
It is.
Especially for those who are feeling disillusioned or powerless.
Exactly. And the community aspect plays a huge role too, right?
Oh, yeah.
These QTubers connect online and form these tight-knit groups.
Right.
Where they just constantly reinforce each other's beliefs.
Yeah.
And it becomes this echo chamber, shutting out any opposing viewpoints. And this sense of belonging can be incredibly seductive.
So we're seeing this perfect storm brewing, A pre-existing distrust of authority, a longing for simple explanations in a complex world, the allure of belonging to a community.
Right.
And then you layer on the almost addictive nature of the conspiracy itself.
It's a recipe for deep commitment.
It is.
And we can't forget these Cubers aren't just passively consuming information.
Right.
They're actively creating and sharing content.
Right.
Becoming evangelists for the QAnon message.
Yeah, they believe they're spreading the truth, enlightening others, and ultimately saving the world.
Yeah, but in reality, they're contributing to this vast and incredibly effective propaganda network.
That's what makes this so scary.
It is.
It's not just about individuals falling down a rabbit hole. It's about how these beliefs are amplified and spread through these online networks.
Right.
And that brings us back to the challenge. How do we counter this? It feels almost impossible to break through that wall of belief.
It's incredibly difficult debunking the theories themselves. Yeah. Often backfires.
Right.
You end up just feeding that us versus them mentality,
right.
Reinforcing this idea that they possess this secret knowledge that the rest of the world is trying to suppress.
So how do you reach people who believe they're already in the know?
Right.
that they hold the truth while everyone else is asleep. It feels like you're speaking different languages.
We have to shift the focus, I think.
Okay.
Instead of attacking the beliefs directly, we need to address the underlying conditions that make people susceptible to these kinds of narratives in the first place.
So what does that look like? Where do we even begin?
Well, it's a multi-pronged approach.
Okay.
We need to strengthen critical thinking skills, teach people how to evaluate sources, recognize bias, identify manipulative tactics.
Yeah.
I mean, media literacy has never been more crucial.
It's about empowering people to be discerning consumers of information.
Yes.
Not just in the context of QAnon, but across the board.
Absolutely.
In this age of information overload, we're constantly bombarded with messages.
Right.
And knowing how to sift through all that noise is essential.
Exactly. And we need to be mindful of the algorithms driving our online experiences too, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Social media platforms are designed to keep us engaged, often by feeding us content that aligns with our existing beliefs.
Right.
This creates echo chambers,
Right.
where we're only exposed to information that confirms what we already think,
Right.
making it even harder to challenge those beliefs.
So it's not just about individual responsibility, it's also about the systems that shape our online world.
Exactly.
We need to hold these platforms accountable for how their algorithms contribute to the spread of misinformation.
Absolutely. And we can't forget about the importance of real-world connections, too.
Yeah.
Social isolation is a major factor in making people vulnerable to conspiracy theories. You know, when people feel disconnected, they're more likely to seek belonging and meaning in online communities,
Right.
where those needs can be readily exploited.
So this fight against misinformation isn't just about winning arguments or debunking theories.
No.
It's about building a more resilient society. It's a society where people feel connected, empowered, and equipped with the tools to navigate the complexities of the digital age.
You hit the nail on the head. It's a long-term effort
Yeah.
requiring a shift in our culture and our values.
Yeah.
We need to foster a healthy skepticism, encourage respectful dialogue, and create spaces where people can engage in constructive debate without fear of being attacked or ostracized.
You know, it's easy to feel overwhelmed
Yeah,
by the scale of this problem.
it is.
QAnon, election interference, the rise of extremism.
It's a lot.
It's a lot to process. Where do we find hope in all of this?
Well, the hope lies in recognizing that we're not alone in this fight, right?
Right.
There are researchers, educators, journalists, activists, and everyday individuals all over the world
Yeah.
working to combat misinformation and build a more informed and resilient future.
And it starts with each of us.
It does.
Taking responsibility for our own information consumption. Being mindful of our biases, critically evaluating sources, engaging in thoughtful conversations. That's how we begin to shift the tide.
It's about reclaiming agency in a world that often feels designed to manipulate us.
Right.
It's about remembering that we have the power to choose what we believe and to shape the information landscape around us.
But it's not just about individual choices, it's also about systemic change.
Yeah.
We need to demand better from our institutions, from our media, and from the tech companies that control so much of our online lives.
Absolutely.
We need to push for greater transparency, accountability, and a commitment to ethical practices that prioritize truth and human well-being.
Exactly. It's a collective effort.
It is.
And it starts with recognizing that we're all in this together.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
we have a shared responsibility to protect our democracy, our communities, and our shared reality from the corrosive effects of misinformation.
Well said. This deep dive into QAnon has been a sobering journey. But I think it's a necessary one. It's forced us to confront some uncomfortable truths about our information ecosystem
Yeah.
and the forces that are shaping our world.
And it's highlighted the urgency of taking action. We can't afford to be complacent. The stakes are simply too high.
They are.
The future of our democracy, our social fabric, and our collective well-being
Right.
depends on our willingness to engage in this fight
Yeah.
for truth and reason.
So let's talk about the documentary's investigation into Q's identity.
Okay.
The filmmakers, they build this compelling case, you know, pointing to Ron Watkins as the most likely suspect. It all culminates in this dramatic confrontation where
Right.
Watkins seems to accidentally admit to being Q.
Really?
Yeah.
What happens?
That scene, it's a masterclass in tension and ambiguity. You see Watkins struggling to maintain his composure, caught between the desire to protect his anonymity
Right.
and this almost compulsive need to reveal his role in this global phenomenon.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
It is.
This need to kind of Confess.
He talks about the thrill of manipulating the masses,
Oh, wow.
of shaping narratives and watching them played out on the world stage.
Mm,
It's both chilling and strangely captivating.
I bet.
You can't help but wonder what motivates someone to wield that kind of influence from the shadows.
And that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is.
What drives someone to create and orchestrate a movement like QAnon?
Yeah.
Is it a lust for power,
Right.
a warped sense of idealism, a
Mm-hmm.
desire to expose what they perceive as a corrupt system,
Yeah.
or perhaps a combination of all of these factors?
It's a question that the documentary leaves unanswered.
Right.
And perhaps it's a question that can never be definitively answered.
Yeah.
But the very act of asking these questions,
Yeah.
of grappling with the complexities of human motivation, I think that's crucial to understanding how we got here
Mm-hmm.
and how we can prevent something like this from happening again.
Exactly. It's not enough to simply label Ron Watkins as a villain or a mastermind.
Right.
We need to delve deeper to understand the social, cultural, and psychological forces that allowed someone like him
Yeah.
to gain such a foothold in our collective consciousness.
It's about recognizing the broader patterns at play,
Mm-hmm.
the vulnerabilities in our systems and in ourselves
Right.
that make us susceptible to manipulation and misinformation.
Absolutely.
And it's about using that knowledge to build a more resilient future.
Absolutely. By understanding the mechanics of how QAnon gained traction, we can identify those vulnerabilities and develop strategies to counter them.
Yeah.
We can strengthen our critical thinking skills, educate ourselves about the tactics used by propagandists, and build more resilient communities that are less susceptible to these kinds of narratives.
So it's not just about unmasking Q, it's about unmasking the forces that allowed QAnon to flourish.
Right.
And it's about using that knowledge to build a more informed, a more discerning, and ultimately a more empowered citizenry.
You've put it perfectly. It's a call to action for all of us.
It is.
We need to be vigilant, informed, and engaged.
Mm-hmm.
We need to reclaim our agency in this information landscape and work together to create a world where truth and reason prevail.
We've been talking about the very real consequences of QAnon, the violence, the broken families, the erosion of trust in our institutions.
Right.
But it feels like the movement itself is constantly evolving, like adapting to the pushback.
Yeah, it's like a virus,
Right.
As soon as you think you've got it contained, it mutates and finds a new way to spread.
Yeah.
And one of the most alarming trends, I think, is how QAnon is infiltrating mainstream politics.
Right. We're not just talking about like fringe groups anymore.
No.
We're seeing QAnon talking points and conspiracy theories being echoed by elected officials,
Right.
by media personalities, even by people we know in our own lives.
And that's where it gets really dangerous, I think. When
Yeah.
these ideas start to seep into the mainstream, they become normalized.
Right.
People who would never have considered themselves QAnon followers start to accept certain aspects of the narrative, even if they reject the more outlandish claims.
It's like the slow drip of poison, slowly eroding our shared reality and our ability to have reasoned conversations.
Absolutely.
It's no longer just about those who identify as QAnon believers. It's about how these ideas are influencing the broader culture.
Exactly. And it's happening on a global scale.
Oh, yeah.
QAnon is no longer confined to the United States.
Right.
We're seeing these QAnon-inspired movements popping up in Europe, in Asia, in South America.
It's everywhere.
It's tapping into these global anxieties about everything from COVID-19 to climate change to economic inequality.
Right. It's providing the simple, seductive narrative that blames all the world's problems on the shadowy cabal of elites.
Right. That's us versus them.
Yeah. It's a dangerous recipe for instability and unrest.
Absolutely.
So how do we fight something that's so pervasive, so adaptable?
Right.
It feels like trying to swat at a swarm of bees.
We can't address QAnon solely as an information problem.
Right.
You can't just fact-check your way out of this.
Yeah.
We have to recognize that it's filling a void for a lot of people.
Okay.
A void of meaning, of belonging, of a sense of agency in a world that feels increasingly chaotic and out of control.
So it's not enough to debunk the conspiracy theories.
No.
We have to offer something better,
Right.
something that addresses those deeper needs, those longings for connection and purpose.
Yeah.
But what does that look like? What's the antidote to QAnon?
I think part of it is strengthening our communities.
Okay.
Fostering genuine human connection, creating spaces where people feel heard and valued.
Mm-hmm.
It's about rebuilding trust, Yeah. Trust in each other, trust in our institutions, trust in the systems that are supposed to serve us.
And it's about empowering people to be critical thinkers.
Yes.
To question what they see and hear, to recognize manipulative tactics, and to seek out reliable sources of information.
Absolutely.
We need to equip people with the tools to navigate this complex information landscape and to make informed decisions.
And let's not forget about the role of education either.
Right.
We need to be teaching media literacy and critical thinking skills from a young age.
Yeah.
It's about giving people the ability to discern fact from fiction, to evaluate sources, to recognize bias, and to understand how information is produced and disseminated.
It's a long-term project, a generational project, really.
It is.
But it's absolutely essential if we want to build a society that's resistant to the lure of misinformation and extremism.
Absolutely.
And I think that brings us back to the documentary Q, Into the Storm.
Yeah.
It's not just a deep dive into the world of QAnon.
No, it's a warning.
It is.
A warning about the fragility of truth in the digital age, about the power of misinformation to shape our perceptions and our actions,
right,
and about the very real consequences that can result when we allow these forces to run unchecked.
It's a call to action for all of us.
It is.
A call to be more discerning consumers of information, to engage in respectful dialogue, to challenge misinformation when we encounter it.
Yes.
And to work together to build a more informed, a more compassionate, and a more resilient society.
Because in the end, the antidote to QAnon isn't just about debunking conspiracy theories.
Right.
It's about creating a world where those theories no longer find fertile ground.
Yeah.
A world where people feel connected, empowered, and hopeful. A world where truth and reason prevail.
Well said, and that's our deep dive into the world of QAnon.
That's it.
It's a complex, challenging, and often disturbing topic.
It is.
But one that we can't afford to ignore.
We can't.
The stakes are simply too high. The future of our democracy, our society, and our shared reality depends on our willingness to engage in this fight and to build a world where truth, reason, and compassion prevail.
Well said.
Thanks for listening.